Hey everyone, this is David Brown with the migration update for March 12th, 2024 from the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. Kim and I started out the morning at the Braddock Bay East Spit, and it was a beautiful morning. After a few really windy days, it was much calmer this morning, and the lake was really still as well. And with that sunshine, we had some really nice lights on the ducks in the bay. And it was important to have good light because that helped Kim spot this bird. Now the bird on the left is a gadwall, but this bird on the right is a widgeon, but we see that it has gray sides and a red head. And when it turned, we could also see that it had a yellowish stripe down the front of the face. So this is not an American widgeon, but rather this is a Eurasian widgeon. Eurasian widgeon is a species that I've had some seasons for the Hawk Watch, but not every year, so it's always a special treat to get one. And here's a pair of long-tailed ducks flying past. Overall, it was a good morning at the East Spit with a total of 45 species. Heading over to the Hawk Watch platform, the beautiful sunny day continued with light to moderate westerly winds, though in the late morning a northeast lake breeze did kick in, and then the winds were kind of back and forth between the westerly wind and the lake breeze, settling mostly in a more northerly direction. And it was really good cloud cover for spotting, mostly sunny skies but a thin layer of high clouds, really helping us spot those birds that were up high. Here we have a big bulky gull that's kind of dirty looking underneath. This is a first winter herring gull. We had these two common ravens fly by, calling with their deep croaks. Here we have a hawk with a long striped tail that it's got spread out here and sort of long wings, kind of a flying cross overall. This is a Cooper's hawk. Here we see another species with a somewhat long tail and long wings. We can see it's very plain underneath, a little bit of marking on the underside of the wings. This is a northern harrier, and because of the lack of markings on the upper breast, I would say this is a juvenile. This was probably the most stunning bird of the day. If we look at the shape, it's a buteo, but it's kind of got long, skinny wings and a little skinnier looking, not big and bulky like a red tail. And we see that it's really dark underneath, and there's only one species of buteo that we regularly get the dark morph of, and that is rough-legged hawk. Now this bird does not have a bold, dark trailing edge to the wings, and the tip of the tail, instead of being a bold line, is more of just a diffuse dark coloration. So I think this is a juvenile rough-legged hawk. And of the dark rough-legged hawks, it's typical for the adult males to be the ones that are really jet black, whereas females and juveniles like this one are somewhat dark underneath, but when you properly expose the photos or get a good look, you see that a lot of areas are really more brownish rather than that really dark black. And on this bird, you can even see the dark carpal squares, which are a good field mark for all rough-legged hawks, but especially on the light morphs where they're easier to see. Well, if this bird was equally as rare as the last one, I might say this was the stunning bird of the day. And maybe this was the stunning bird of the day in terms of numbers. This is an adult red-shouldered hawk, and we had 55 of them today. So you can see a lot of orange coloration throughout the underside of the body and the wing coverts. And then the actual flight feathers of the wings have this nice patterning of black and white. And the tail looks like a black board with thin white chalk lines on it. And if we look near the wingtips, we also see that there's some light that shines through, like a translucent crescent, and that can be a really good field mark for red-shouldered hawks, especially at a distance to help differentiate them from red-tailed hawks or broad-winged hawks. Here's another red-shouldered hawk, but this was the first juvenile of the season, and it's typical that the adults come first because they want to get up on the nesting grounds, and then the juveniles come later. And we see that the underside markings of this bird are quite different from the adult. We don't see all that orange coloration. We don't see the black and white patterning. It's really a lot more plain looking and kind of like a typical hawk. And these look very similar to juvenile broad-winged hawks, which we'll see later in the season. Let's take a look at the wingtips on this bird. Now we see on the left wing that there's some feather damage. It seems to be missing at least one feather here, so that's why this wingtip looks so weird. But from this angle going away, look how pointed this wing looks. And you have to be careful because, like I said, broad-winged hawks in juvenile plumage look very similar on the underside and would have more pointed wings, kind of like this. But when this bird turned to soar, we see that it has that more squared-off blunt wingtip that's typical of red-shouldered hawks, with 5 feathers making up the wingtip compared to only 4 making up the wingtip of broad-winged hawks. And we can see a little bit of that translucent crescent that I showed on the adult, That also holds for the juveniles, so that's a good way to tell them apart. Now, we won't be seeing juvenile broadwings for at least another month now. We probably won't see any broadwings at all for another month, and the adults tend to come first. So it's not really an ID problem we have to worry about this time of year, but it's just something to keep in mind later in the season when both juvenile broadwings and juvenile red shoulders are possible. Well, come to think of it, maybe this was actually the stunning bird of the day. Here we have a beautiful topside view of a grayish silver raptor. We see a white patch on the rump. We see somewhat pointed wingtips and a long tail. This is an adult male northern harrier, and this bird was doing a territorial or display flight. So this bird seems like it's considering our marsh as a possible nesting location. And this was the first day it was around, and it was doing this big, crazy roller coaster flight where it goes up and down and it twists and turns. So I think it was trying to impress a female, but we're really hoping that this bird sticks around and puts on a show like that for us. And here's the same bird as it turned to show us the underside view. And notice how white it is underneath. You have the black wingtips. You have a black trailing edge to the secondaries. And again, notice that long tail and grayish head. Adult male northern harrier. Let's see if we can identify these two birds. Let's start with the top one. We see a really two-toned coloration to this bird. Dark body and wing coverts, and then more silvery flight feathers in the wings and tail. We see a really small reddish head and wings held up into a slight V. So this is a turkey vulture. If we look at the bottom bird, what do we see? Looks like a hawk. In that shape, we should be thinking buteo. We see dark patagial bars and a belly band. So we should be thinking red-tailed hawk. And we don't see a dark trailing edge to the wing, and we do not see a red tail, so this is a juvenile red-tailed hawk. And here's a bird I hope you all can identify. Large, dark raptor with white head and white tail. This is an adult bald eagle. Here's another raptor where we see dark patagial bars and a very faint belly band. But on this one, we do see a dark trailing edge to the wings and a red tail, so this is an adult red-tailed hawk, and this is on the more lightly marked end of the spectrum. Here we had a very large gull sitting on the water. We see a very white head and a very dark back. This is a great black-backed gull. In fact, it's the largest species of gull in the world. Here we have a large dark raptor. We see a large head and bill, and we see a lot of white underneath, kind of splotchy, and a lot of white on the underside of the body. So this is an immature bald eagle. Remember that golden eagles, when they have white underneath, it's very clean white patches in the center of the wings and at the base of the tail. Bald eagles have a lot more splotchy, messy looking white underneath. So immature bald eagle, but how do we tell the exact age? Well, we see a lot of white on the underside of the body, and that's usually a sign of the second and third year bald eagles. Another thing we can look at is the trailing edge to the wing, and this is sort of an uneven trailing edge to the wing. We see two different ages of feathers. So the longer feathers, we see two of them here and then three of them here. These are retained juvenile feathers. These are feathers that it grew while it was in the nest as part of its first plumage. Now, at 1 year of age, it would have replaced most of the feathers in its wings, and those feathers that have been replaced are shorter and not quite as pointy. So like these darker ones in between these retained juvenile feathers have been replaced one time. So we can tell that this is a bird coming up on being 2 years old based on that patterning in the wing. Here's another adult red-shouldered hawk. Notice those translucent crescents near the wingtips on both wings. And shape-wise, compared to a red-tailed hawk, I always feel like red-shouldered hawk feels a little bit more delicate. It's not as big and bulky as the red tail. The wings look maybe a little bit thinner. The tail looks a little bit longer. So when you have both red tails and red shoulders together, the red tails just stick out as bigger and bulkier, and the red shoulders just feel a little daintier. Here's a bird that tried to sneak past us, so I only got photos as it was going away. The first thing that stands out to me is that the overall plumage is a combination of blacks and whites. And specifically, we see a lot of black here in the belly area, and we see black carpal squares. So this is a rough-legged hawk. This is a light morph compared to the dark morph we saw earlier. They come in two different morphs. This is the light morph. And I would say that this one is also a juvenile because of that diffuse tail band and the lack of a dark trailing edge to the wing. Here we have a nice comparison shot of two raptors, so let's try to identify them. The bird on the left has long wings and a long tail and is very whitish underneath. We see a little bit of patterning on the wings. We see dark wingtips and a dark trailing edge to the secondaries. This is an adult male northern harrier. The bird on the right, we see dark patagial bars and a belly band, so we should be thinking red-tailed hawk. And there's no dark trailing edge to the wing and no red tail, so this is a juvenile red-tailed hawk. And if we look at the size difference, the harrier looks quite a bit smaller. Now, I think it might have been a little higher than the red tail was, so maybe that makes it look even smaller than it really was. But with raptors, often the males are smaller than the females, so with northern harriers, the adult males sometimes look quite a bit smaller than the females we see. So this could be a big red tail and that small male northern harrier. Taking a look at the eBird checklist for the Hawk Watch, today we had 50 species. And on the way home from the count, I made a stop over at the owl woods and got to see a northern Sawet Owl. And normally I don't like to share photos of birds like this simply because I don't want to draw a lot of attention to them. And it's better to reduce the number of people that are possibly disturbing them. But I think this might be a good chance just to remind some people of the etiquette involved with going to a place like the owl woods to see northern saw-whet owls and long-eared owls. And I'm not here to be the bird police, but I think that there's a lot of beginners who are going over to owl woods and they see people acting in certain ways that may be unethical and they may think that's appropriate behavior when really it's not. So here's my philosophy on it. You can take it or leave it. These are birds that probably migrated a fairly long distance overnight to get to the owl woods in the first place. They're roosting in the day so that they can rest up and sleep, so that they can continue on with their migration. And I think it's our responsibility to disturb them as little as possible. Now, you can certainly go to the owl woods and see them. Behavior you want to avoid is making too much of a disturbance around the owls. You can see in this photo, the bird had its head tucked. Don't do things to try to get the bird to look at you and wake up. And in some ways, it's maybe non-intuitive. You might think that a really good owl photo is one where it's got really big eyes and it's looking at you. But often when you see that kind of photo, you know that that means that the photographer was probably disturbing the bird in some way. I'm not saying that all photos that are good like that were necessarily taken in an unethical way, but there's sort of a conflict of interest often in terms of getting good photos. So try not to disturb the bird. Don't damage the trees to get a better photo. Don't be breaking off branches. Don't even really be getting in there. Sometimes you'll see people that get really close to the birds. They hold their camera like right up in their face. So just avoid that kind of behavior. Minimize the time that you're there disturbing them. Get in there, look at the bird, enjoy them, and then get out. And with long-eared owls, they tend to flush really easily. So if you know where one is and you're able to see it, try to avoid getting even closer and closer to the point where it might flush, because then you deprive other people of the opportunity to see these birds. So the bottom line is, when you go to see these birds, just keep the birds' welfare in mind. And let me promise you, no one's basing their opinion of your worth as a human being by how good your owl photos are. You may enjoy the Facebook likes, but really, in the scheme of things, it doesn't matter that much. I had 2 new species for the season today, which were Eurasian widgeon and northern saw-whet owl. And taking a look at the hawk count report for our migrant raptor totals, today we had 16 turkey vultures, 5 bald eagles, 7 northern harriers, 2 sharp-shinned hawks, 2 Cooper's hawks, 55 red-shouldered hawks, 20 red-tailed hawks, 2 rough-legged hawks, and 2 merlins for a total of 111 migrant raptors, which brings the March total to 384 and the season total to 542. Taking a look at the forecast for tomorrow, in all caps I wrote good migration alert because tomorrow's looking like a really good day to get out to the Hawk Watch. Partly cloudy skies, a high in the low to mid 60s. Winds are starting southwest and shifting around to west at 10 to 20 miles per hour. So those are good wind directions, and it should be strong enough to prevent a lake breeze. Should be a really pleasant day to be out. We had decent conditions in the late morning and early afternoon today, and we had those really big numbers of red-shouldered hawks. So obviously some of the pressure that built up from having a bunch of days of poor migration was released today with those birds coming through, but I think there's probably a lot more to follow them, especially since the flight kind of shut down this afternoon when the wind shifted. So this time of year, it's a good time to see red-shouldered hawks, especially the adults. The turkey vulture numbers should continue to pick up, getting good numbers of red tails. Can get really good numbers of rough-legged hawks this time of year. Golden eagle is certainly a possibility, and numbers of other things are starting to pick up a little bit with the accipiters and falcons. So we're starting to see more variety, and with the southwest winds overnight, there should be a decent songbird and non-raptor migration. So it might be nice to get out early in the morning and see what new arrivals have shown up. Overall, tomorrow's looking like the best day we've had in a while, besides that little bit today where we had the big flight. But today's total was the best day we'd had in like a week. So the weather goes through cycles. So tomorrow's looking like a good day, and then after that it's looking like poor weather again for a while. So if you can make it out tomorrow, I would highly recommend it. For Thursday, we're looking at rain developing later in the day, high in the upper 40s, and light northerly winds. Less favorable wind direction, would only expect light migration. And for Friday, it's looking cloudy with showers and a high near 45, and north-northeast winds at 10 to 15. That's an unfavorable wind that's fairly strong, going to be chilly, and would not expect much migration. And remember to check out lycobirds.com, where you can see all of our resources, from our identification guides to our daily quizzes. You can sign up to get the quizzes as a daily email as well. Well, today ended up being surprisingly good, and let's hope the forecast holds and we have another big flight again tomorrow. Hope to see you out soon at the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, and please subscribe so you don't miss any of these daily updates from the Braddock Bay Hawk Watch. From Lycobirds, this is David Brown. Thanks for watching.